Trump swore he'd cut America's power bills by 50%, but instead they've jumped 26% in Arizona and 25% in New Jersey, hitting families harder than ever. In Congress, Jasmine Crockett throws his own promise back in his face. Half the price, more like double the damn pain. Cameras capture the moment Trump freezes for a humiliating 47 seconds of silence as the chamber erupts. This isn't politics, it's betrayal, it's fury, it's justice on live TV. Will Jasmine's relentless takedown finally shatter Trump's biggest lie? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The arena explodes before he even speaks. Red caps shimmer under floodlights. Fists pound the air, and the chant thunders like a war drum. Half the price. Half the price. Donald Trump leans into the microphone, a smirk curling at the edge of his mouth. Within 12 months, I will cut your electricity bills in half. The words detonate, ricocheting through the stadium like fireworks. To the people packed shoulder to shoulder, it feels less like politics and more like salvation. Cameras zoom across the crowd, fathers hosting children onto their shoulders, grandmothers clutching rosaries, teenagers waving signs painted with lightning bolts. On the giant screens behind Trump, graphics flash like gospel, a power meter spinning backwards, a family's utility bill slashed cleanly down the middle, smiles frozen in artificial perfection. For a moment, it seems possible. For a moment, America believes. The belief has a cruel half-life. To footage fractures into a news montage, screens bleeding into each other, headlines blaring, anchors grim-faced. Inflation at 2.7%, one voice announces, but electricity bills are rising twice as fast. The chant morphs into static, the crowd's euphoria into the hiss of overdue notices printing in kitchens at dawn. Across the country, lights flicker in homes where the promise was supposed to shine brightest. In Arizona, Maria Gonzalez spreads her utility bills across a wooden table already scarred by years of struggle. Last year's total was high, but this year's has nearly doubled, an unscalable wall of numbers. She stares at her son's asthma medication on the counter and whispers to herself, electricity or medicine. The promise of relief has mutated into the weight of despair. New Jersey tells the same story. A retired teacher opens his bill and mutters, 25% more. Again? He remembers chanting in 2020, his voice raw, his hope alive. Now, each envelope feels like a betrayal sealed in ink. Families whisper about unplugging appliances, skipping meals, cutting corners that no longer exist. The slogan "half the price" has become a taunt, a cruel echo bouncing through empty wallets. Back on the campaign screens, Trump's voice still booms, half the price. But now, played on phones and TVs in dim kitchens, it sounds hollow, almost mocking. The Jumbotron fireworks are gone, replaced by flickering bulbs and anxious silence. What was once a promise of abundance has curdled into a reminder of scarcity. The crowd that once roared is now a nation that waits for answers. And in the shadows of that waiting stands Jasmine Crockett. She is not dazzled by slogans, not fooled by fireworks. She holds folders thick with receipts, charts scrawled with percentages, testimonies from mothers like Maria. Her gaze is steel, her resolve unshakable. The stadium roar may have faded, but Jasmine is listening to another sound, the quiet, heavy breath of a country wondering if it has been deceived. When promises turn into burdens, who pays the price, the leader or the people? The numbers don't whisper anymore, they scream. Arizona households are staring at a 26% increase in their electricity bills. New Jersey isn't far behind with a 25% hike. Across the map, double-digit spikes punched through wallets that were already stretched thin. The promise of half the price has twisted into a dagger, stabbing deeper with every new envelope that arrives in the mail. Hope is collapsing into anger, and the silence in America's kitchens is heavier than any rally roar. Maria Gonzalez feels most when the house falls quiet at night. Her son coughs in his sleep, the asthma medication lined up neatly on the counter like soldiers waiting for orders. She opens the bill under a dim kitchen light, her hands trembling. The total isn't just higher, it's monstrous, almost double what it was last year. She presses the paper flat against the table, as though sheer force could shrink the numbers. But numbers don't bend to willpower. They bend families, they bend futures. Maria whispers to herself, do I keep the lights on, or do I keep my boat breathing? In living rooms across the country, The same question unfolds with different faces. A retired couple in Illinois sits in darkness, their TV unplugged to save pennies. In Utah, a teenager does her homework by flashlight because her parents refuse to risk another late fee. In Wyoming, a small diner owner closes early, unable to shoulder the cost of running fryers and freezers at peak hours. These are not statistics, they are wounds. And every wound bleeds into the next until an entire nation feels faint. Jasmine Crockett watches and listens. Late nights find her hunched over piles of reports, her desk a battlefield of receipts, charts, and testimonies. A video clip of Trump promising half the price loops in the background, not as a rallying cry, but as evidence in a case she is quietly building. She circles numbers, underlines phrases, highlights the human cost. Each story: Maria's medication dilemma, the teacher's unpaid bill, the family eating cold dinners, adds another brick to the wall she is constructing against the hollow slogans of power. But research is not sterile, it cuts. Every page Jasmine turns is soaked with someone's anxiety, every statistic another punch in the gut. She doesn't just see data, she sees Maria's trembling hands, the teacher's muttered curse, the teenager's fading flashlight. Her anger simmers, but she holds it tight, channeling it into precision. The country doesn't need rage, it needs truth sharp enough to slice through lies. And Jasmine is sharpening her blade. In homes, anger begins to replace despair. Neighbors gather in living rooms, venting frustrations, comparing bills, wondering aloud how long promises can go unpunished. On social media, hashtags surface, voices swell, the chant of half the price is mocked, repurposed, thrown back at the man who sold it. The fury is no longer private, it's public, pulsing, contagious. What happens when broken promises hit the dinner table of everyday Americans? Congress could no longer ignore the storm. The headlines were relentless, the bills unpayable, the anger unstoppable. Committees met behind closed doors, aides shuffled papers with trembling hands, and finally the gavel fell, a live televised hearing on the nation's energy costs. Cameras would roll, lights would glare, and for the first time, the man who once promised half the price would face the weight of what those words had become. Across America, families who once cheered were now tuning in, hungry for answers, desperate for justice. Jasmine Crockett didn't hesitate. When the call came from members of Congress to step forward, her voice cut through the chamber like steel. "I'll take it," she said, not as a boast but as a vow. Behind her eyes flickered the faces of Maria Gonzalez in Arizona, the retired teacher in New Jersey, the families in Illinois and Wyoming forced into darkness. She knew this wasn't just a hearing, it was an indictment, and she was carrying the evidence. While others hesitated, calculating risk, Jasmine stepped into the fire willingly, knowing the flames would burn but refusing to look away. That night, Capitol Hill shimmered like a stage set for history. Floodlights cast long shadows across marble columns, and television trucks lined the streets, satellites aimed at the sky. Inside her office, Jasmine sat alone, the hum of the desk lamp the only sound. Before her lay a mountain of letters, each one a fragment of a shattered promise. A mother begging for help because her child's oxygen machine drained too much power. A veteran confessing he had unplugged his refrigerator at night to afford medication. A single father admitting he skipped meals to keep his daughter warm. Each letter was another wound, another reason her voice could not tremble tomorrow. Jasmine read them one by one, her pen moving like a scalpel, circling, underlining, marking the truths no slogan could erase. She'd whispered the stories aloud, as if rehearsing them into the marrow of her bones. Every tear-stained page became a weapon, every envelope another round of ammunition. When the camera lights turned on, she would not speak as a politician. She would speak as the vessel of their pain. Outside her window, the dome of the Capitol glowed white against the night, a beacon and a battlefield all at once. But the enormity of what awaited her pressed heavy. Trump was not coming alone. He would have allies at his side. A wall of loyalists ready to sneer, shout, and shield. She pictured Marjorie Taylor Greene pounding the table, Mike Johnson slamming the gavel, Trump himself smirking into the camera, dismissing her words as lies. For a moment, doubt clawed at her ribs. Could one voice cut through that fortress? Could truth survive the circus of power? Jasmine steadied her breath, clenched her fists, and whispered back to the silence, "Yes, one voice can." The nation stirred restlessly as dawn approached. News tickers blared countdowns, hashtags trended, households set alarms to watch. Tomorrow, promises and burdens would clash under the blinding light of truth. The world would be watching, waiting for the moment the curtain rose. Will one voice be enough to shatter the shield of power? The Capitol was a theater and the whole nation had bought a ticket. News anchors filled the airwaves hours before the gavel struck, their voices sharpened with anticipation. Today could redefine the balance between promise and truth, one declared, while another whisper, the silence of America's kitchens may finally find its voice. Hashtags flared like sparks. Hashtag half or hype, hashtag for 7 seconds, hashtag power or people. Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook pulsed with countdowns. Memes of Trump's half the price line recycled with bitter irony. The atmosphere was less a hearing and more a prize fight, with millions of Americans sitting ringside from their living rooms. The chamber itself throbbed with tension. Reporters elbowed for position, their cameras trained on the double doors. Photographers' flashes ricocheted off marble columns. Staffers whispered about the electricity spike as if the numbers themselves were ghosts haunting the room. Rows of seats were packed with witnesses. Maria Gonzalez clutched her folder, a single mother from Arizona about to see her pain elevated into history. Beside her, retirees, small business owners, and students sat stiff-backed, the living embodiment of bills turned burdens. Every breath in the room carried weight, as though no one wanted to inhale before the spectacle began. Then the door swung wide. Donald Trump strode in with his trademark swagger, chin high, lips curled in a knowing smile. He soaked in the flashes, waving like a conquering general. The cameras loved him, his crimson tie catching the light, his grin rehearsed for 1,000 rallies. He gestured casually, as if the rising bills outside were just numbers on a spreadsheet instead of leaves unraveling. The press surged forward, microphones shouting questions, but he offered only smirks and one-liners. Greatest economy the world has ever seen, he muttered into the nose, his voice practiced, his confidence unshaken. Across the chamber, a different energy moved. Jasmine Crockett entered quietly, not with pomp but with presence. Her pace was deliberate, her eyes fixed forward. She held a thick binder against her chest like a shield, stuffed with data, letters, testimonies. Unlike Trump's theater, her gravity came from silence, the kind that can bend a room. The audience felt it, the reporters noted it. Where Trump's arrival crackled with noise, Jasmine's arrival drew a hush, as if even the cameras leaned closer. In her gaze was no performance, only steel sharpened by sleepless nights and the weight of a nation's stories. The broadcast split screen captured it perfectly, Trump beaming, his shoulders loose, the showman unbothered. Jasmine gripping her documents, eyes fierce, the warrior unafraid. Side by side, the contrast electrified television screens across America. In kitchens, factories, classrooms, people stopped mid-motion, caught by the tableau. It wasn't just two figures walking into a room, it was the collision of spectacle and substance, bravado and truth, performance and accountability. Every viewer could feel it, the moment before the storm. The gavel had not yet struck, but already the battle lines were drawn. The air vibrated with expectation, the weight of betrayal and hope tangled together. The world wasn't asking if a fight would happen, it was asking how brutal it would be. In this room of power, who will command the truth? The gavel cracks once, and the chamber falls into a brittle silence. Jasmine Crockett rises, her binder heavy in her hands, and gestures toward the giant monitor wheeled into place. With a click, the screen flickers to life. There he is, Donald Trump in 2020, rally lights blazing, voice booming through time. Within 12 months, I will cut your electricity bills in half. The line detonates again, but this time, in this room, it doesn't inspire, it haunts. The echo rolls across marble walls like a ghost returning to demand justice. Jasmine lets the silence hang before she speaks. Her heels strike against the floor as she steps closer to the dais, pulling out a stack of papers. That was the promise, she says, her voice cutting clean. With a swift motion, she slams down the first chart. Inflation, steady at 2.7%. Then the second, electricity, spiking like a fault line. 26% in Arizona, 25% in New Jersey, double digits nationwide. The numbers scream louder than any chant ever could. She turns toward Trump, her finger stabbing the air. Half the price, the American people got double the pain. Trump leans forward, his smirk hardening into a scowl. Fake news, he barks, jabbing a finger back at her. These are lies, total lies. What's killing us is this green energy lunacy. Windmills, solar panels, nonsense, it's all a scam. His voice rattles the microphones, half of the chamber erupting in applause from his allies, the other half gasping in outrage. His words slice the air like shrapnel, but Jasmine doesn't flinch. The tension coals tighter. Reporters scribble furiously, cameras zoom in, and in the gallery, Maria Gonzalez clutches her folder, her lips pressed into a thin line. A retired teacher in the back shakes his head, muttering under his breath. The chamber feels like a storm cloud seconds before lightning. Jasmine slowly lifts another chart, this one a timeline of bills stacking higher and higher, month after month. She holds it above her head for all to see. These are not theories. These are receipts, real families, real pain. You promised relief, and instead delivered ruin. Trump interrupts again, voice rising to a shout, wrong. People had the cheapest gas on Labor Day since 2020. Nobody talks about that. I saved Americans billions. His defenders clap, some jeer at Jasmine, but the applause dies quickly when she steps closer, her voice lowering to a dagger's whisper. Gas at the pump means nothing if families can't keep the lights on at home. Cheap miles don't comfort a mother who has to choose between her son's medicine and an electric bill. The gallery exhales sharply, the words sinking like stone. The clash has begun, and the chamber vibrates with divided fury. One side sees denial cloaked in bravado, the other, truth sharpened into a weapon. For a heartbeat, both stand locked, neither yielding, the entire nation watching through their screens. This isn't debate, it's collision, spectacle, trial. What happens when truth meets denial in front of a nation? The words had barely left Jasmine's lips when Marjorie Taylor Greene shot up from her seat like a thunderbolt. Lies, all lies, she screamed, her voice ricocheting off the marble walls. She jabbed a finger toward Jasmine, her tone dripping venom. You're nothing but a mouthpiece for the radical left, humiliating a president who built the greatest economy this country has ever seen. The chamber erupted, half with applause, half with boos, the nose swelling into chaos. Jasmine didn't flinch, she turned her head slowly, her expression as sharp as glass. If truth feels like humiliation, she said, her voice calm but cutting, perhaps it's because it exposes lies. The words sliced through the uproar, silencing even the hecklers for a breathless moment. Cameras zoomed in, reporters scribbled furiously. A ripple ran through the chamber as the crowd reacted, shock, gasps, then an explosion of clapping from those who had been waiting for someone to pierce the armor. Trump shifted in his chair, his smirk faltering. But Thomas Massey wasn't about to let silence linger. He leaned forward, his voice dripping with disdain. You're cherry-picking numbers, Congresswoman. Energy markets are complicated. Families are paying more because of insane regulations and socialist overreach, not because of President Trump. He banged his hand on the table, his words half argument, half performance. The echo carried, fueling the chaos. Allies rallied behind him, voices rising, drowning Jasmine in noise. Mike Johnson pounded the gavel, his voice straining for control. Order. This is a hearing, not a circus. But his warning was swallowed by the clamor. Trump leaned back, arms crossed, allowing his defenders to build a wall of sound around him. The strategy was clear: overwhelm her with volume, with bodies, with no's. If the truth couldn't be denied, it would be buried. Yet Jasmine's eyes glinted with defiance. She waited, letting the cacophony peak, then stepped forward into the storm. She spoke slowly, each word measured, slicing through the shouting like a blade through fabric. Complicated? No. A 26% increase in Arizona. A 25% increase in New Jersey. Families forced into impossible choices: power or medicine, food or heat. These are not socialist inventions. These are facts. Her voice didn't rise, but the chamber leaned in as if compelled. Against the roar, her precision became louder than their no's. MTG slammed a fist on her desk, snarling, "You're grandstanding." Jasmine turned toward her, eyes steady, lips curling in the faintest of smiles. If standing for the people is grandstanding, then I'll gladly keep standing while you sit in the shadow of broken promises. The chamber detonated. Applause, jeers, cheers, every emotion colliding in one deafening wave. Trump's defenders looked rattled, their fortress cracking. Mike Johnson hammered the gavel again, shouting for order, but control had slipped through his fingers. The hearing had become a battlefield, and Jasmine was not retreating. She stood alone at the center, her binder clutched like a weapon, her voice the only thing steady in a storm of denial and fury. Can one woman outmaneuver a wall of defenders? The gavel struck again, and the room quieted, but not for long. A woman rose from the witness bench, clutching a stack of bills with hands that trembled more from exhaustion than fear. Maria Gonzalez stood before the chamber, her voice barely above a whisper, but each syllable cut sharper than any statistic. Last year, my electricity bill was already high. This year, it has nearly doubled. I work 2 jobs, and still I can't keep up. The words cracked, and with them, something in the chamber cracked too. She held up one envelope, then another, the ink smudge from tears shed in lonely kitchens. When the power company takes this much, she said, her voice breaking, I have to choose. My son's asthma medicine, or the light that keeps him breathing at night. Which one do I count? A collective gasp rippled across the room. Reporters froze mid-scribble, lenses zoomed in. Members of Congress shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The numbers Jasmine had slammed down were undeniable, but Maria's story made them bleed. Trump's eyes narrowed, his jaw tight. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, and moved. His defenders shuffled, waiting to pounce, but even they hesitated under the weight of Maria's voice. In the gallery, other families began to cry quietly, recognizing themselves in her words. A retired veteran clutched his cap, a mother squeezed her child's hand. For a moment, the chamber was no longer marble and microphones, it was every American living room where despair had replaced dinner. Jasmine rose slowly, walked to Maria's side, and placed a steady hand on her shoulder. This, she said, turning to face the chamber, is what your slogans have cost. She held up Maria's bill like evidence in a trial, her tone unwavering. This mother's suffering is not a chart, not a soundbite, it is the face of America's struggle. She is not alone. She represents millions who believed in a promise and instead inherited pain. Her words rang like a verdict, and the silence that followed felt like judgment hanging in the air. From Trump's side, MTG muttered under her breath, loud enough to be caught on a hot mic, "This is just theater." The comment landed like a slap. Jasmine turned her gaze toward her, eyes cold. Theater. She snapped, her voice rising, reverberating. Tell that to Maria's son when his medicine runs out. Tell it to the veteran who sits in the dark. If this is theater, then it's written in blood, in fear, in the lives of people you've abandoned. The chamber erupted again, cheers, outrage, the raw nose of a country split but listening. Maria wept openly, but this time she wasn't alone. Jasmine's arm remained firm around her, anchoring her in the storm. Together they stood, one with the pain, the other with the power to amplify it. Cameras captured the moment, broadcasting not just a testimony but a reckoning. When the people cry out, will leaders hear or dismiss them? The screens flickered again, but this time it wasn't campaign footage, it was cold, hard numbers. CNN's Matt Egan stepped forward, his sleeves rolled up, eyes grim. Ladies and gentlemen, demand on America's power grid is surging like never before, he began, clicking to reveal a chart that spiked like a rocket. Electric vehicles, once hailed as the future, now draw millions of megawatts. And artificial intelligence, its data centers, devour power at rates we've never seen. The grid, once stable, is now under siege. The chart climbed, jagged red lines against a black background, every inch another warning. He clicked again, another chart appeared, this one shaded in gray. That the supply side, shackled. Instead of modernizing, we are clinging to outdated coal plants that should have retired a decade ago. And tariffs imposed on transformers and key infrastructure have driven costs up billions, costs that landed on the laps of ordinary Americans. His words echoed with weight. This is not just bad luck. It is the result of decisions, political decisions. The camera panned across the chamber, heads bowed, jaws clenched, families in the gallery gripping each other's hands. That was when Jasmine stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension like steel. She pointed to the red line screaming upward. These are not accidents, she declared, her tone unwavering. These are choices. Choices to cling to coal instead of investing in clean, affordable energy. Choices to slap tariffs that strangle our own grit. Choices that force Maria Gonzalez and millions like her to suffer in silence, while slogans echo on screens, her binder slammed shut with a crack, the sound reverberating like a gavel. Trump laughed, the sound harsh, almost mocking. "Nonsense," he barked, waving a dismissive hand. "This has nothing to do with me. The problem is those ridiculous solar panels and windmills, ugly, unreliable, killing birds, ruining landscapes. Green energy lunacy, that's what's driving your bills sky high." He leaned back in his chair, arms spread, basking in the cheers of his defenders. For a moment, the no's surged, MAGA loyalists applauding as if a punch had been landed. But Jasmine's reply came swift, her voice rising above the din. "Then explain this." She strode to the monitor, her finger stabbing at the gray chart. "Why are the highest spikes happening in states that rely least on renewables? Why do communities powered by wind and solar see smaller increases, while coal-reliant regions suffer the most? Don't blame the sun for your shadow. Don't blame the wind for your failures," the chamber gasped, the words striking like lightning. Reporters, 10 scratched furiously. Twitter feeds lit up, hashtags surged again. Matt Egan added, his voice steady, "The data is indisputable." Matt Egan added, his voice steady, "The data is indisputable." Denial won't change the bills on America's kitchen tables. The gallery erupted in applause, ordinary citizens chanting, "Facts, facts, facts." The sound rolled like thunder, shaking even the marble walls. Trump's face hardened, his smirk slipping, his confidence cracking under the weight of numbers he couldn't bully into silence. When facts are undeniable, will power still deny them? The chamber could no longer contain its own heartbeat. As Jasmine's words landed and Matt's charts blazed on the screen, the gallery exploded into motion. Protesters unfurled hidden banners scrawled with black paint, "Half the price equals double the lies and bills," not slogans, security lunch, but the signs were already seared into the camera feed, already viral. Reporters' phones lit up, hashtags rocketing to the top. Hashtag power or people, hashtag Trump promise, hashtag Crockett vs. Trump. The world outside was no longer just watching, it was joining in, pouring gasoline onto a fire that had only just begun to rage. Families seated in the gallery rose to their feet, their hands shaking as they lifted envelopes high into the air. Power bills, month after month, waved silently like white flags of surrender. No chanting, no shouting, just the quiet defiance of paper that said more than speeches ever could. The cameras caught it all. Mothers pressing bills to their chests like tombstones, fathers gripping statements with overdue stamps in red ink. For a moment, the chamber wasn't marble and microphones, it was a cathedral of suffering, and the offering was pain. Trump shifted in his chair, irritation cutting across his face. The smirk that had once disarmed crowds now looked brittle, almost desperate. He leaned back, arms crossed tighter, his jaw grinding as the spectacle turned against him. His defenders shouted, trying to drown out the silence of those bulls, but the more they yelled, the more powerful that silence became. Every unpaid notice, every overcharged statement waved like a verdict, an unspoken chorus louder than any applause. And then the cameras found Jasmine. She stood steady, binder in hand, her gaze sweeping the gallery. Her face didn't harden, it softened, her eyes reflecting the crowd's anguish. She raised her voice, not in fury, but in resonance. "These are the receipts of betrayal, these are the ledgers of broken promises. Every one of them is a story, a mother, a veteran, a child. You cannot erase them, you cannot shout them down. They are America." Her words didn't ride above the crowd, they merged with it, one heartbeat, one voice. The director in the control booth ordered a slow cinematic pan across the chamber, protesters dragged away, but still smiling, families clutching bills with trembling hands, Trump hunched in irritation, and Jasmine planted firm as steel. The contrast was stark, almost biblical, the leader insulated by denial, the people exposed by truth, and the lone warrior bridging the gap between them. Screens across America froze on that split image, the powerful refusing, the powerless revealing. The no's died into a strange, holy silence. Even the gavel paused midair as if unwilling to break it. It was the kind of silence that carried weight, the kind that would outlast speeches, the kind that could topple a smirk. Whose silence will echo louder, the people's pain, or the leader's refusal? Trump's patience finally snapped. He lurched forward, palm slamming against the table so hard that the microphones rattled. His face reddened, his voice a roar that shook the chamber. "You're nothing but a puppet for the radical left." He jabbed his finger at Jasmine with the fury of a man cornered, spittle catching the light of the cameras. The chamber recoiled, a collective gasp followed by a chorus of shouts, some cheering, others booing. The room had become a battlefield of no's, but Jasmine didn't flinch. Her eyes locked on him, unblinking, unshaken, as if his rage only steadied her spine. Slowly, deliberately, she leaned into her microphone, her voice cutting through the chaos with surgical precision. "If standing for truth makes me a puppet," she said, her tone laced with ice, "then every American holding a bill is your master." The words detonated like dynamite. The chamber erupted, half in applause, half in outrage, the sound colliding like thunder against stone walls. Reporters leapt to their feet, scribbling furiously, live feeds blasting the quote across social media. Twitter imploded in real-time, hashtags multiplying, hashtag puppet or people, hashtag master of bills, hashtag Crockett strikes back. TikTok flooded with clips replaying the moment, each caption sharper than the last. Memes were born before the echo of her words had even died. Across the country, living rooms and diners buzzed, strangers pointing at screens and saying, "Did you hear that? She just crushed him." Trump tried to recover, but the fury that once galvanized his rallies now twisted against him. His defenders shouted louder, trying to fill the cracks in his composure, but their voices sounded frantic, desperate. He pointed again, fists clenched, sputtering about conspiracies and disloyalty. Yet each word seemed smaller than the silence that followed Jasmine's strike. For the first time, his anger didn't dominate, it revealed. Jasmine remained motionless, her binder still clutched like a shield, her face calm, as a soldier who had weathered fire before. The gallery leaned forward, hungry for her next move. The contrast was brutal. Trump seething, red-faced, his fury boiling over. Jasmine cold, precise, her authority born not of volume but of truth. The spectacle was no longer about bills or percentages, it was about control, and for the first time, Trump didn't have it. The chamber was fire and lightning, rage clashing with resolve, anger wielded like a weapon, in full view of the nation. And yet, beneath the fury, one question hung heavier than all the shouting, heavier than the hashtags, heavier than the thunder of clashing voices. When anger becomes a weapon, who gets burned? The chamber was still vibrating from Trump's fury when Jasmine leaned forward, her voice slicing through the nose like a blade through fabric. She didn't raise her tone. She didn't need to. Every syllable carried the weight of millions. "You promised half the price. Today, bills are double inflation. Yes or no? Did you fail?" The room froze. The words didn't just hang in the air. They drilled into the marble, into the cameras, into every living room tuned in across America. Trump's mouth opened, then closed, his chest heaved, his eyes darted, but no sound came. For the first time, the man who had thrived on words, on slogans, on insults, on endless talk found none. The networks caught it instantly. Producers barked orders, screens across the country lit up with a stopwatch graphic, ticking mercilessly in the corner. 1 second, 2, 5, the silence was unbearable. By the 10th second, the crowd in the gallery shifted, whispers rising like wind before a storm. Reporters glanced at one another, stunned, their pens frozen above notepads. Jasmine remained still, her gaze locked on Trump, unblinking, her binder pressed to the table like a judge's gavel. 11, 14, 17. Social media detonated in real time. Clips of Trump's blank stare spread like wildfire, Twitter captions screaming he froze. TikTok videos layering the moment with dramatic music, YouTube streams already titling it the 29-second silence that shook America. By the 20th second, even Trump's allies shifted uncomfortably. Marjorie Taylor Greene leaned forward as if to interject, but one sharp look from Jasmine cut her off before she dared to speak. Mike Johnson hammered the gavel, but even his calls for order sounded hollow against the dead air swallowing the chamber. 21, 24, the cameras zoomed closer and closer, filling screens with the image of a man who once commanded arenas now paralyzed under a single question. At 27 seconds, the tension was unbearable. A protester in the gallery couldn't hold back, shouting, "Answer her!" Applause rippled like sparks through dry grass, quickly stifled by security, but the momentum was unstoppable. The silence had become the answer. At 29 seconds, the stopwatch blinked red on TV screens, the number etched in memory, immortalized. Trump finally shifted in his chair, muttered incoherently, but the damage was sealed. Those 29 seconds were already history. Jasmine didn't gloat, she didn't even smile. She simply leaned back, eyes steady, and whispered into the microphone. The silence speaks. Her words were softer than his rage, but infinitely louder. The chamber erupted half in applause, half in chaos while outside. Hashtags like hashtag to 9 seconds and hashtag frozen promise stormed the digital world. It was no longer about bills, or charts, or debates. It was about power. And in those 29 seconds, the illusion of it cracked. Across the country, people stared at their screens, stunned into the same silence that had just unraveled a presidency. Can silence speak louder than 1,000 words? The silence had barely shattered when Marjorie Taylor Greene shot up from her seat, voice shrill and desperate. This is all political theater. She's twisting the numbers, twisting the truth. She shrieked, jabbing her finger across the chamber. But before her words could take root, the gallery erupted like a tidal wave. Dozens of voices rose in unison, pounding like drums. Answer her! Answer her! Answer her! The chant rolled over MTG's protest, louder, fiercer, drowning her in a flood of demand she could not silence. Her mouth kept moving, but no one could hear her anymore. On the opposite side, Thomas Massie tried to seize the floor, fumbling through a rushed defense. The real issue is the energy markets. Inflation caused by renewable subsidies and... His voice faltered as he flipped through crumpled notes. The words tangled in his mouth, contradicting themselves, spilling out in fragments that made less and less sense. A reporter smirked as cameras zoomed in. Within seconds, Twitter was ablaze with clips captioned, "Massie malfunction." Memes spread at lightning speed. His wide-eyed stutter looped endlessly, dubbed over with circus music. What was meant as defense became humiliation, broadcast in real time to millions. Mike Johnson slammed the gavel again and again, his voice cracking with desperation. "Order, order in this chamber," he pleaded, but the wood-hitting marble sounded like raindrops against a hurricane. The chants of "answer her" only grew louder, bouncing off every wall, amplified by the fury of the people. Families in the gallery waved their bills again, silent but devastating. The chamber no longer belonged to politicians, it belonged to the nation's rage. Trump sat rigid, his jaw tight, his allies flailing around him. The wall of defenders that once shielded him now looked fractured, brittle, their power leaking away with every failed interruption. MTG's shrieks were ignored. Massie's stumble became comedy. Johnson's authority dissolved in futility. And Jasmine, still calm, still steady, stood at the eye of the storm, binder in hand, her silence more commanding than their nose. The camera panned wide, capturing the collapse in one frame. Trump cornered, his allies crumbling, the people chanting, Jasmine unyielding. It wasn't just a hearing anymore. It was a reckoning, a slow unmasking of power's fragility. For the first time, the fortress looked like ruins. What happens when the shield protecting power begins to crack? The chamber was still rattling from the chants when Jasmine rose again, binder in hand, her expression unreadable, but her eyes burning. She pulled a new folder from the stack and flipped it open with deliberate calm. "We've talked about promises," she said, her voice steady. "Now let's talk about costs, the hidden costs buried beneath slogans." She lifted a sheet of paper high so the cameras could catch the seal stamped at the top, the United States Government Accountability Office. The room stiffened. This was no speech, this was evidence. With a sharp motion, she slammed the report down on the table, the echo ringing like a hammer. "These tariffs," she declared, stabbing her finger at the page, "have driven up the price of transformers and critical grid infrastructure. Not by millions, by $3 billion every single year. And who paid that bill? Not corporations, not lobbyists, not politicians. The American people," the chamber gasped. Even a few Republican members shifted in their seats, their eyes darting to the cameras, unsure how to mask the shock on their faces. Trump shifted too, his arms tightening across his chest, his jaw clenched. "Fake numbers," he barked, but the words lacked their former bite. Jasmine didn't turn toward him, she didn't need to. Instead, she flipped another page, her voice slicing through his interruption. "This isn't fake, These are your own administration's reports, signed, sealed, and filed. You claimed you were saving American jobs, but what you did was tax every American home. You turned their kitchens, their bedrooms, their children's futures into collateral for your trade war, the gallery murmured in shock. A man in the back stood up, holding his bill high, shouting, "$3 billion, that's us." The chant caught fire again, but this time it wasn't just answer her. It was a tidal wave of voices roaring. $3 billion. $3 billion. The sound shook the chamber, the cameras zoomed in, and the truth became a drumbeat echoing far beyond the marble walls. Jasmine drove the point home with a final blow. She raised another chart, this one a graph of climbing tariffs mapped directly against consumer costs. The line was merciless, climbing higher with every year. "This isn't an accident," she said, her tone sharp as glass, "it's a choice." And the choice was made on the backs of families who could least afford it. She slammed the binder shut with a crack, the punctuation of a verdict no one could escape. For the first time, even Trump's defenders had no words. Silence spread, not the silence of strength, but of shame, of realization. Jasmine stood alone in that silence, her presence heavier than any chant, her evidence undeniable. When money trails lead to truth, will anyone dare follow? The chamber had barely recovered from the thunder of $3 billion. When Jasmine pulled out another folder, this one thick with grim receipts of a different kind, she laid out photographs of crumbling smokestacks, rusting conveyor belts, and coal piles drenched in rain. Her voice was low at first, almost mournful, but every word struck like steel. America is spending billions not to build the future but to keep the past alive. Obsolete coal plants, propped up with subsidies, sucking money that should be fueling innovation. She held up the report for the cameras, the numbers stark and damning. She stepped closer to the microphone, her tone sharpening. Old coal doesn't just pollute air, it pollutes trust. These plants were meant to close years ago, but instead, billions of taxpayer dollars have been funneled into keeping them on life support. That's billions stolen from classrooms, from hospitals, from families praying for relief. While bills double for working Americans, subsidies double for dirty fuel. The gallery shifted, uncomfortably, to truth landing heavier than smoke. Trump's face turned crimson, his fist pounding the table. "Ron, coal is beautiful. Coal is American. I saved thousands of jobs, and you should be thanking me, not slandering me." His voice boomed, but this time it didn't drown Jasmine out, it clashed with her, a desperate roar against a steady blade. She waited for the nose to peak, then cut through with icy precision. Jobs are not saved when families can't afford light. Patriotism is not measured by how long you can keep a smokestack standing. It's measured by whether a mother can keep her child warm at night without choosing between food and heat. The words cracked the chamber like thunder. In the gallery, Maria Gonzalez wiped her tears and whispered, "Yes." A veteran stood, his voice breaking, "She's right. We're paying the price." The chant that followed wasn't orchestrated. It was organic, raw. No more coal. No more coal. The walls trembled under the sound, echoing into the microphones, spilling across the nation's screens. Trump's defenders shouted back, a frenzy of denial and slogans, but their voices rang hollow. Jasmine raised her hand, silencing the room by sheer presence. She pointed again at the rusted smokestacks projected on the screen. "This is not a symbol of strength, it's a monument to neglect. The future is waiting to be built, but we are burying it under ash. Every dollar spent to preserve this past is a dollar stolen from the tomorrow our children deserve." Her binder slammed shut, the sound like a coffin closing. The room split into rage on one side, revelation on the other. Trump shouted himself hoarse, his words dissolving into no's, while Jasmine stayed etched in the marble air. Cameras caught the contrast perfectly, the old clinging to survival, the new demanding birth. What weighs heavier, the past we refuse to bury, or the future we refuse to build? The chamber's screens flickered once more, and Matt Egan stepped back into the spotlight, his voice taut, his slides already cued. "We're not just talking about homes anymore," he said, clicking to reveal a glowing skyline of data centers. "Artificial intelligence, the very technology shaping tomorrow, is consuming electricity at rates this country has never seen. One facility can guzzle as much power as a small city. Multiply that by hundreds, and you have a grid on the brink." The red line on his chart shot upward like a missile, sharp, relentless, impossible to ignore. He clicked again, and the curve bent even higher. In the surge of electric vehicles, millions of them charging nightly, and demand skyrockets. We are building the future, but without the grid to hold it, that future collapses into chaos. The system was designed for yesterday, not for this, and every gap, every failure, falls on the backs of families who are already gasping for relief. The words struck harder than numbers. They were warnings carved in electricity. The gallery stirred uneasily. Mothers clutching children's hands, fathers whispering under their breath, eyes fixed on the terrifying slope of the chart. Jasmine rose, her steps deliberate, her binder snapping open again. She pointed at the screen, then at Maria Gonzalez, then back to the chamber. "AI should power the future," she declared, her voice ringing like steel, "not bankrupt the present. EVs should free us from oil wars, not chain us to higher bills." She paced like a prosecutor before a jury, her fingers stabbing each word into the marble. "These technologies are not the enemy. The enemy is neglect. The enemy is clinging to coal while innovation suffocates. The enemy is tariffs and broken infrastructure while families drown under costs they cannot control." Trump scoffed from his chair, muttering into the microphone, "Dreams and fairy tales, windmills and fantasies." His allies cheered, but their applause was brittle, forced, as if even they could feel the ground slipping beneath their feet. Jasmine turned, her eyes blazing. "Fairy tales, no, this is reality. America is bleeding billions because its leaders chose ash over progress, slogans over solutions. Imagine if those billions wasted on subsidies and tariffs had been spent on a modern grid. Maria would not be crying over a bill larger than her rent. Families would not be waving power statements like surrender flags. We would be ready for the future instead of shackled by the past." The gallery erupted in applause, louder than before, drowning Trump's mutters. Signs lifted again, but this time not just bills. They drew images of solar panels, wind turbines, and a new slogan scrawled in bold ink: "Build forward." The chant spread, low at first, then swelling. "Build forward. Build forward." Hashtags lit up in real time. Hashtag power the future. Hashtag build forward. Trending within minutes. The contrast was stark, Trump glowering, Jasmine radiant, the crowd electrified not by fear, but by hope. For the first time, the hearing didn't feel like a courtroom, it felt like a turning point. But the question lingered, hanging in the air heavier than any statistic. Will innovation free us, or chain us to higher bills? The chamber quaked with a new chant, raw and primal, born from anguish, not partisanship. Bills, not slogans. Bills, not slogans. The words hammered like fists against the marble, echoing up into the rafters, rattling even the lenses of cameras broadcasting live to millions. It wasn't polished, it wasn't rehearsed, it was a cry torn straight from the gut of America. Families lifted their utility statements into the air again, waving them like verdict slips, like evidence too damning to be ignored. The noise rolled through the chamber like thunder, shaking the fragile defenses of those clinging to power. Jasmine turned slowly, her gaze sweeping across the gallery. Her hand rose, not to silence them, but to frame them, to give their fury focus. She pointed directly at the families holding their bills aloft, her voice firm and steady. "This," she declared, her words slicing through the roar, "is the jury that matters." The gallery roared louder, their chant transforming into cheers, their tears glinting under the harsh lights of the hearing. A mother clutched her child's hand and whispered through sobs, "She's speaking for us." The cameras caught it, and the country watching at home felt it too. Trump shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between the gallery and the screens. He leaned toward his allies, whispering furiously, but their faces were pale, their lips pressed tight. They could hear it, the verdict forming in real time. The walls he had built with slogans were crumbling under the weight of paper and ink, of bills no one could pay. He slammed a hand on the table, trying to bark a rebuttal, but the chant drowned him out. For the first time in years, Donald Trump was not the loudest voice in the room. Jasmine stepped closer to the microphone, her voice carrying above the chaos with clarity. "You want to know who America believes? It isn't the politicians behind this desk. It isn't the slogans shouted at rallies. It is the families who bleed every month to keep the lights on. Their bills are the testimony, their struggle is the truth, and their silence has ended here. Tonight." The words hit like a hammer blow, a judgment rendered not by course, by kitchens, not by lawyers, but by mothers and fathers and children. The gallery surged to its feet, tears streaming, nodding as if they were one body, one voice. A veteran raised his weathered hand in salute. A teenager waved her flashlight high, a symbol of what her parents could barely afford. Across the country, living rooms erupted with applause, strangers clapping at their screens as though they too sat in the gallery. The chamber no longer felt like Congress, it felt like a courtroom of the people, and the verdict was looming. If the people are the jury, what's the verdict? Trump gripped the microphone with both hands, his knuckles white, his voice a blast meant to reclaim the room. I built the greatest economy this world has ever seen. He thundered, his words booming off the marble, his arms sweeping wide as if the force of his memory alone could drown out the chance. He spoke of record stock markets, of low unemployment, of crowds who once cheered him like a savior. His tone was fire and defiance, the old rally rhythm beating back against the storm. For a moment, it felt like he was trying to drag the chamber into yesterday, into a world where slogans ruled and facts bent. But the gallery didn't move, families still clutched their bills, their eyes locked on him with hollow fury. The chant simmered, low but unrelenting. Bills, not slogans, bills, not slogans. The sound gnawed at the edges of his speech, reducing every claim to an echo. Trump raised his voice higher, veins straining, spitting words about greatness and betrayal, but each syllable collided with paper lifted in silent protest. He was speaking to ghosts, and they were unimpressed. Then Jasmine stood, her presence still and immovable, her eyes locked on him like a blade poised to strike. She didn't match his volume, she cut through it with precision. And still, Maria can't keep her lights on. The line landed like a lightning strike. The chamber gasped, then erupted, the roar of applause cascading like an avalanche. Maria buried her face in her hands, sobbing, while strangers around her rose to clap until their palms burned. The camera zoomed tight, capturing Trump's frozen face, jaw clenched, nostrils flaring, unable to conjure a rebuttal. Jasmine turned, her voice carrying above the storm. What good is the greatest economy if families sit in the dark? What is glory worth if children can't breathe without power for their medicine? History books don't keep the lights on. Dills do, and America is drowning in them. Her words were steel wrapped in fire, a verdict disguised as a question. The roar of the gallery reached fever pitch, a tidal wave no slogan could repel. Trump slammed his fist down once more, but the sound was small now, swallowed by the crowd, by the cameras, by the truth. He had reached back for the past, but the present had already buried it under bills and silence. Can a past glory erase present pain? The chamber still rattled from the eruption of applause, but Jasmine didn't wait for silence, she seized it, her voice carrying like a drumbeat over the fading roar. This is not left versus right, she said, her tone sharp enough to still the restless air. This is not red against blue. This is truth versus lies, bills versus slogans, families versus empty promises. Her words cascaded across the room, each one pounding harder than the last, each syllable landing like a gavel of its own. The camera zoomed in, catching her face in close-up, sweat glistening at her temple, fire smoldering in her eyes. She raised Maria's bill high above her head, her arm shaking not with weakness, but with force. This is the only verdict that matters. This is the evidence no one can deny. Justice doesn't belong to the powerful, it belongs to the people. The gallery roared back, their voices crashing like waves, mothers crying, veterans saluting, children cheering as though they were watching a battle finally turn in their favor. Trump tried to interject, but his words drowned under the sound of a chamber transformed. For once, he was not the center of gravity, she was. His allies looked cornered, shrinking into their seats as the crowd surged behind her. The split-screen broadcast across America captured it perfectly. Trump hunched, red-faced, smoldering in defeat, and Jasmine standing tall, her silhouette carved in light, binder clutched like a sword. The contrast was devastating, almost biblical, the fall of bravado against the rise of truth. Jasmine lifted her chin, her voice dropping into a solemn, deliberate cadence that felt less like a speech and more like a vow. If we measure power by who shouts the loudest, then lies will always win. But if we measure power by who endures the silence, who bears the burden, who pays the bill, then the people are the strongest force in this nation. And tonight, their voice is louder than any gavel, any slogan, any false promise. The final word hung in the chamber, heavy, undeniable, A moment carved into memory. The camera froze on her determined face. Her eyes locked not on Trump, not on her colleagues, but on the millions watching at home. It was cinematic, electric, the kind of image destined for history books and protest posters alike. What if justice finally found its voice today? The hearing ended, but the explosion had only just begun. By the time the chamber's lights dimmed, every major network had already locked onto the same headline. 47 seconds of silence. CNN replayed the moment on loop, a stopwatch graphic ticking in the corner. Fox scrambled to reframe it, but the clip spoke louder than any spin. MSNBC plastered Jasmine's line, "Yes or no, did you fail?" across the chyron in bold. The silence had become its own story, and America couldn't look away. Trump's allies rushed into hallways, faces pale under the harsh light of reporters' cameras. MTG barked about deep state manipulation. Massey mumbled about market forces. Mike Johnson pleaded for patience. But every word sounded flimsy, like duct tape on a collapsing dam. Memes of Massey's stumble collided online with clips of Trump's frozen glare, the internet branding it #FrozenPromise within minutes. In war rooms across D.C., strategists whispered about damage control, but no strategy could erase what millions had already seen with their own eyes. Meanwhile, Jasmine's clip tore across platforms with the force of a hurricane. On TikTok, teens sensed the silence to beats, mocking the longest pause of Trump's career. On Twitter, hashtags like #for7seconds and #Crockett strikes trended worldwide. Facebook lit up with grandparents sharing the video alongside comments like, "Finally, someone stood up for us," in living rooms, diners, union halls, and classrooms. Strangers replayed the silence over and over, shaking their heads, their anger hardening into something unshakable. The pause was no longer a gap in speech, it was a verdict, carved into the collective memory of a nation. And at the center of it all was Jasmine. The camera had caught her unwavering stare, the calm fury of a woman who carried the stories of millions in her binder. That image, her steady against his silence, became the poster of the moment, shared, remixed, celebrated. She hadn't just won an argument, she had branded history with a moment that would replay long after the gavel struck. The nation sat restless, buzzing, unsettled, replaying the same question on screens, on radios, in whispers at the dinner table. The silence had outlived the no's, and history had chosen its headline. When history replays, which 47 seconds will America remember? The cameras were still rolling when Jasmine stepped out of the chamber, but the scene that followed no longer belonged to politics, it belonged to people. Ordinary citizens surged forward, breaking past the velvet ropes, arms outstretched. A veteran hugged her first, whispering through a cracked voice, "You spoke for us." A mother pressed her child into Jasmine's arms, tears streaming, thanking her for making their pain visible. The marble hallway trembled not with chance, but with gratitude, raw and unfiltered. Maria Gonzalez stood near the exit, clutching her bills like battle scars. Jasmine walked straight to her, pulling her close in a fierce embrace. "This isn't the end," Jasmine murmured, loud enough for the cameras to catch but soft enough to feel like a vow. "This is the beginning of change." Maria wept openly, her son clinging to her side, and for the first time in months, the heaviness in her chest loosened. Around them, strangers nodded, some crying, some cheering, as if a dam had broken and hope was flooding back in. The scene spread across live broadcasts, ordinary Americans holding Jasmine's hands, thanking her as if she were a soldier returning from the front lines. Her binder, battered from the battle inside, hung at her side like a shield that had done its job. The contrast was unmistakable, one leader drowning in silence, another walking out into the people's embrace. It wasn't victory written in headlines, it was victory etched in human touch. Hope surged not from statistics, not from speeches, but from the sight of a woman standing unshaken, carrying the people with her. Across the nation, living rooms lit with renewed faith, whispers turning into conviction. Can courage in one room ignite hope in millions of homes? The roar of the chamber faded into memory, but its echoes refused to die. News anchors dissected it, hashtags immortalized it, and families replayed it, but the true power of that night wasn't in the silence or the shouts, it was in what came after. Jasmine Crockett didn't leave through the side door. Shielded by aides, she walked straight into the crowd. Mothers reached for her hands, veterans saluted, children stared at her like they had just seen what courage looked like. There were no barriers now, just a sea of people closing around her, claiming her as their own. The camera caught the final image in slow motion. Jasmine's binder tucked at her side, her face illuminated not by stage lights, but by the glow of ordinary citizens pressing close. She didn't tower above them, she disappeared into them, her silhouette dissolving into the crowd she had fought for. And in that dissolving, she became larger than any headline. She became a symbol. The narrator's voice carried over the scene like a verdict carved into stone. A warrior for justice is not defined by the enemies she defeats, but by the lives she defends. The screen darkened to black and white, her figure vanishing into the mass of Americans who would carry her words long after the chamber's doors closed. Then the closing message appeared, stark and unyielding. Justice belongs to the people today, tomorrow, always. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was sacred, heavy with possibility, daring viewers to fill it with their own voices. If you were in that chamber, would you have stood silent or spoken truth? The story reminds us that silence in the face of injustice is itself a choice. Jasmine's courage shows that truth only has power when someone dares to speak it aloud, even against walls of denial and no's. Promises mean nothing if they are not measured against the lived struggles of ordinary people, and real leadership is proven not by slogans, but by service. Each of us has a chamber where our voice matters, whether in our family, community, or nation. The question is, when the moment comes, will you stay silent, or will you stand and speak the truth? Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.